Good morning. Welcome to today's halacha share. Thank you everyone who is joining us. You know, a week passes in between each halacha share. I think in particular this week, we walk into a different world. So much has changed from when we stood at this podium just last Sunday. We're literally in a different world. And some people assume my words are being addressed to the political situation in America, which obviously affects the world. And yes, it's true. That has been a major reason why the world has changed a lot just in the past week, just in the past matter of hours. But really, I believe the bigger impact in the world is, unfortunately, the passing of one of the Gedolei Hador, the Poskei Hador, Rav David Feinstein, who faithfully served Klal Yisrael as a leader, as a posek. Chazal write that Moshe Rabbeinu, Ish Moshe. Chazal write that Ish Moshe Anav Ma'od. And that was very true about Rav Moshe Feinstein, but perhaps even more so, very, very true about Rav David Feinstein. And today's shir should be Zecher Nishmas Rav David. We're going to cut the shir short this morning. It's Kavod Torah for everyone to participate in the Levaya of Rav David Feinstein, which is scheduled to begin a little bit from now. I hope to have someone monitoring when exactly the Levaya is starting. But figure this year will go for about 40 minutes or so to give everyone a chance to switch channels and to be able to participate in the Levaya of one of the Gedolei Hador. The shir today is entitled Sodom Salt and Mayim Acharonim. And it's a shir which is predicated on this past week's Parsha, Parshas Vayera. When you talk about salt in this past week's Parsha, ask any kid saying over the Parsha, what does salt have to do with this week's Parsha? I would think most kids, grown-up kids, all of us would point to Lot's wife. Right? If you go on the exclusive VIP tours in Eretz Yisrael, you could even find a tour guide who will point out to you, there is the Netziv Melach, there is the pillar of salt, there is Lot's wife. I'm not sure they know exactly where it is, but the pasuk does say she is in Netziv Melach, she's a pillar of salt, Ad Yom Hazeh. And actually in the Gemara, Tosfos, they debate different issues with her literally turning into a pillar of salt. As a machlokas, you find, was it that she died and was covered in salt? Or did she literally, her death was through salt? She was killed by killer salt. Yes, they talk about it, talk about different halachas of Tumah. Tosas discusses, Seches Nida, about Lot's wife being the fact that it's not a classic covenant, it's not a classic mace. But that's not what I'd like to talk about this morning. What I would like to talk about is a concept, and I found it quoted in Midrashim, how the exact destruction of Sodom came about. We find Torah talks about Sodom was unfortunately an evil city. They were an immoral city. They were a city that was against the true concept of chesed. They would punish people if they would host guests. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu decreed that they should be destroyed. If they had enough righteous people, would have been saved, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu decreed that they should be destroyed. The way HaKadosh Baruch Hu destroyed the city of Sodom was gafris v'melach, ash and salt. This salt rained in from Shemayim and literally destroyed the city. It actually makes sense why Lot's wife, it's not a random thing. Of all the things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided how to kill Lot's wife, she turned into a pillar of salt. According to the Midrashim, it makes a lot of sense. The city itself was destroyed with this fiery ash and salt. And Lot's wife, by dint of the fact that she turned around and she really, on her own merits, didn't deserve to live, that's why she perished. But she perished in a similar way as the people. She melted away. She was killed and enveloped by this ash and salt. But it doesn't stop there. The Medrash says that this salt ended up, the salt that destroyed Sodom, ended up in bodies of water. The Yam HaMelech came about, at least partially, if not all, by this salt of the destruction of Sodom. And Medrash talks about the Yam HaKlainis, which is the Mediterranean Sea, having salt in it. And it says it basically flowed from there to bodies of water all around. And thus, the remnants of the destruction of Sodom transferred into bodies of water. That's all from this past week's parsha, the destruction of Sodom. That leads us to Gemara in Chulin. There's a Gemara in Chulin, Daf Kuf Hey Amud Aleph. Gemara says a lashon Mayim Rishonim mitzvah. The idea to wash before one eats a bread meal, that's a mitzvah. Make a bracha on it. But Mayim Acharonim, the Gemara says chova, is an obligation. First, we point out what's the difference if we call something a mitzvah, call something a chova. The Gemara explains because the reason why we have Mayim Acharonim is because of a sakana, for fear that if someone doesn't wash their hands after they eat a meal, they're going to come in contact with Melech Sodomis, this evil salt from the city of Sodom. And if they touch their eyes with Melech Sodomis, Chas v'shalom, that could blind them. So the reason why we wash Mayim Acharonim, the Gemara in Chulin says, is a sakana, because of Melech Sodomis, this salt from Sodom. And therefore, we wash our hands. In fact, the Gemara says so much that we don't need to make a bracha on it. You only make a bracha on something which you do exclusively for a mitzvah. So Mayim Rishonim, the concept of washing before we eat, that's a mitzvah. But Mayim Acharonim, after we eat, after we touch bread, after we touch salt, then we say no. That's a chova. That's an obligation to do because of sakana. And if you do it for sakana, we don't make a bracha. That's what the Gemara says. So it's fascinating how this concept of Mayim Acharonim is something which really derives from this week's parsha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu destroyed Sodom, Gafris, V'melach, Sreifa, Koarzo, Mamish. Hashem didn't bring a Mabel. Hashem didn't bring, One of the other plagues we saw in Mitzrayim, there was a plague of Gofris V'Melech, and that destroyed Sodom, and the remnants of it went into the waters. And the fear is when you get salt, sea salt, that salt is a remnant of the destruction of Sodom, and it still was potent in its powers. It could do damage, it could cause sakana, it could blind people. And that's why we wash Mayim Acharonim. Now if I stop right here, so I probably have you spooked out, no? We all know there's some concept. I'm sure I'm talking to Bachram Yeshiva. We know the concept of Mayim Acharonim. We know there's some concept. But now we might have gotten a better taste for where it's from, what the reasoning for it is. This deadly salt from Sodom. You know, who would want to touch something that came from a makkah? It's literally what it is. And that's a reason why the Gemara says we have Mayim Acharonim. But to be honest, if you look around the world, not everyone is so makbid on Mayim Acharonim. You find many people that don't do it. You'll find different ways people do it. Maybe some houses the men do it, the women don't do it. What's this all about? So that's where we'd like to come to explain and share tonight. All different aspects of Mayim Acharonim. And now if we just stop in the Gemara, at least this Gemara in Chulin, sounds absolutely clear. There's a chova, there's a responsibility because of sakana that one has to wash Mayim Acharonim after a meal. But then you come to there's a Tosos in Brachos, Afman Gimel and Beis. I have it on the top of the sheets. Who has the sheet? So Tosos says, the Gemara uses a loshon that we wash our hands from Mayim Acharonim. It says, the Yisim Kedoshim Elo Mayim Acharonim. They darshan a pasuk that we should be holy, that's why we wash Mayim Acharonim. So Tosos writes, Ta'avka lahem shei regim lita yidayim archa suda ne melech Sodomis. This is only for in those times people would wash, for people that would wash because of melech Sodomis. Avu anu. But Tosos writes, but us, in our generation, here the Bali Tosos in Europe, are writing, She'in melech Sodomis matzei b'neinu. We don't no longer have that ash salt from the destruction of Sodom. It's not around anymore. Einon regilam lito achar asuda. We don't have the minog. We don't wash Mayim Acharonim after the Suda. Melech Sodomis. It's no longer a problem. And therefore, it's also not ma'akev that we make a bracha on it. So Tosos seemingly is saying, very clearly, this whole idea of Mayim Acharonim, because of Melech Sodomis, that's a metzias. If there is this sea salt that you could trace its roots back to Sodom, okay, there's a sakana. If you touch it, you can blind yourself. Tosa says, in our days, that's not the salt that we have. It's not matzoi anymore. And therefore, people are not makbid in it. We're not knowing to do this. Major Tosos. So this whole idea, this fear, this remnants of the destruction of Sodom, Tosa said, in his times in Europe, no, we don't have it. No such thing. Obviously, that's a major game changer. You know, Bishlam of something was a clear-cut mitzvah. Let's say sometimes you have zeros. Okay? So, there's a concept in halacha that sometimes even if the tam behind it is batal, but the mitzvah itself is continues. But we saw the Gemara in Chulin said that Mayim Acharonim is a chova mishum sakana. The whole nature of the din was because of the fact there's a sakana. If the sakana doesn't exist, Zak Tosfos, halacha doesn't exist. Wow. So we started off Mayim Acharonim chova. We better do it. We don't want to get some Sodom salt on us. And once you see this Tosos and Brachos, sounds like we're home free. We don't have it anymore. Yeah? If Tosos could be Mekel, I could be Mekel. No? We always have to read on. So that's what happened in the Gemara and in Tosos. If you look at the Shulchan Aruch, Didei Mayim Acharonim, Siman Kuf Pei Aleph, Zok the Mechaber in Sif Aleph, Mayim Acharonim Chova. The Mechaber writes, Mayim Acharonim is a chov, quoting the Gemara in Chulin. 100% is saying you got to do it. Mayim Acharonim Chova. So the Beis Yosef, first and foremost, goes through Didei Mayim Acharonim. First thing he tells us, you got to do it. You got to do it because of sakana. That's the lashon of the Gemara. Mayim Acharonim chova mishum sakana. Then in the next about 8 seifim, he goes through all different practical halachas regarding Mayim Acharonim, which for the record, probably will not have time to go through all those halachas today. We're trying to aim to get to the root of the halacha of Mayim Acharonim. But we'll touch on some specifics. But you could look over there, the halachas of Mayim Acharonim. Then all of a sudden in Sif Yud, at the end of the Siman, this is what the Mechaber brings. Yesh she'eino gemlito Mayim Acharonim. There are those who don't wash Mayim Acharonim. You know what the Bir HaGolah says? You know what the source of the halacha in Sif Yud is from? Take a guess. Tosos and Brachos. It's also very convenient the way Yosef did it. Smart man. He writes Mayim Acharonim Chova. Then he goes and lists 8 halachas of it. And then, only then, at the end, he says, you know what? Yesh, there are some people who are not makbid in Mayim Acharonim. Now make up your mind. Is Mayim Acharonim chova? Is that something which is a chiyuv to do? Is Mayim Acharonim a chov? Something you absolutely have to do. Otherwise, chas v'shalom, you get this salt from Sodom, which could cause a sakana on you. Or do we say, no, we don't have that salt anymore? Yesh omrim, she'eino lito Mayim Acharonim. So what's the halacha? Mechaber himself seems to be teasing us. At one point he says chova, at the end he says some people don't have this whole minhag. So what way is it? I think in particular this is a halacha which there is a good amount of confusion. But if I went around the audience and asked, how many people do Mayim Acharonim religiously? Okay, got one hand. I got a few no hands. I got some of these. Yeah. I think just the way the Mechaber set it up leads to confusion. He told us it's a chova, but then he throws in Yesh Omer, we don't do it. Okay? So what do the poskim say? Do we keep Mayim Acharonim or not? Are we afraid of Melech Sodomis, of this sakana, or not? So there's a Bir Hagra. It's brought down in the Mishnah Berurah in Sif Katar L'Chaf Beis in the bottom of your sheets. It's also brought down in the Sefer Maisa Rav, which has stories of people watching what the Gra did. And there he brings, we're write to you the lashon of the Mishnah Berurah. Das hagrabim biro itzarech gama inna. That nowadays we also need to wash Mayim Acharonim. Why? The tam el Sodom is Yadayim Zumos gama shayich. It is shayich, this reason of Melech Sodomis. The Chain calls of Magen Avram b'Shem Mekubalim. The Magen Avram says in the name of the Mekubalim, the Chol Adam Yizar b'Mayim Acharonim. Everyone should be careful to do Mayim Acharonim. The Chain Hichmar Marshal b'Yam Shel Shlomo. The Marshal in the Sefer Yam Shel Shlomo is Machmer. So to the Chidah, the Birkei Yosef. So the Chavetz Chaim is bringing the Gra. The Gra's Shita is to be Machmer in Mayim Acharonim. And the way the Chavetz Chaim brings him down, why is the Gra Machmer in Mayim Acharonim? Because he says it is shaykh to find Melech Sodomis. Really? Tosfos told me we don't have it. The Gra says we do have it. Right? It sounds like Indiana Jones and the Lost Salt. Like, is it there or not there? Or is the Gra tracing it down? No, it could be the Gra had powers, to figure out, in the world he could sense if there's Melech Sodomis there or not. If you look in the Mishnah Berurah earlier, let's start from there. So the Gra seems to say that 100% we're Machmer Mayim Acharonim, and we find that there is Melech Sodomis still around. If you look halfway through the Mishnah Berurah in Sef Katan Aleph, he talks about the Chashash of Melech Sodomis, B'chol Suda al Nimtza Melech. It's Mesakin on the Suda because we know one of the ideas of a Suda is supposed to have salt when you wash some bread. We're afraid some of this Melech Sodomis is going to be mixed in. The Chas Hashem blinds people if you touch it. Right? He tells us nowadays, be very careful before you touch your bodies, before you touch your eyes. Make sure you wash your hands. So, Baruch Hashem, Jewish people were way ahead of this centuries ago. Now, the Chavetz Chaim writes at the end of Sif Aleph, Chavetz Chaim says, nowadays we don't really have Melech Sodomis. That line seems like he's throwing a bone to Tosfos. You should be afraid for salt which is like it, has a similar teva. Wow. So the Chavetz Chaim is introducing, besides Sodom salt, there's semi-Sodom salt. There's some type of salt which is similar in its characteristics as Sodom salt. I don't know if Sodom salt was cursed. What's a semi-Sodom salt? It means it once was touched by Sodom salt and became a Rishon Latoma. I don't know. The Chavetz Chaim is saying, even nowadays, even we don't have exactly Sodom salt, we have Niskatnu Adoros, semi-Sodom salt. And that's something which that's the reason the Chavetz Chaim writes to explain the Mechaber in Sef Aleph. If you look at the beginning of Yud, again he says, the Metzia says you don't really have Melech Sodomis, and that's why Mechaber does write Sheinogim Lito Mayim Acharonim. Yesh Omer that we don't do because we don't really have Melech Sodomis. But the Gra is Machmer. It comes out. Let me first touch up the Chavetz Chaim, then I'll tell you the Gra. From the Gra, it seems the Gra's full, flat, choshesh, the way Chavetz Chaim brings him from Melech Sodomis, and thus he was very Machmer. It sounds like the way the Chavetz Chaim is touching up the Mechaber is, look, there's a concept in the Gemara of Melech Sodomis Chova. So how come the Mechaber at the end says Yesh Omrim and Znam Batzoi? So the Chavetz Chaim is answering the steer in the Mechaber. Chafetz Chaim is telling us, look, it's really true. Tosfos got it right. There isn't exactly Melech Sodomis, but there's this semi-Melech Sodomis. So for the semi-Melech Sodomis, the Mechaber said, look, it's a chova. That is something you should do. There's Yesh Omrim on this semi, then maybe you don't have to do it. That is how I believe the Chafetz Chaim understands the Mechaber. Now, so it comes out from the Mishnah Berurah, sounds like the Chafetz Chaim himself, he brings you the Gra, but he also illustrates to us how the Gra perhaps is being a little more machmer than the Mechaber. The Mechaber, the Chafetz Chaim learns, is not choshesh necessarily for Melech Sodomis, because Tosfos told us it doesn't exist, but rather to this semi-Sodom salt. While the Gra, he sounds like he is machmer for the actual Melech Sodomis, and perhaps the Gra will be more machmer. I found fascinating Aruch HaShulchans. Aruch HaShulchan goes through this whole sugya, and Aruch HaShulchan's position is more machmer than the Chafetz Chaim in the Mishnah Berurah. The Aruch HaShulchan says, look, you see the Gemara says Melech Sodomis is a sakana, and that's why it's Mayim Acharonim. Comes along Tosfos says, we don't have it. I'll read to you the lashon of the Aruch HaShulchan right here in Sivkot and Hay. He writes, El afil l'shitas Tosfos, the lekach chiyuv bizman hazeh. Even according to Tosfos' shita, which there is no chiyuv nowadays, ain't suffix shekasvu kain kedei lamid schus amashin lo nagu b'yameim. When Tosfos said it, Tosfos didn't really mean it. Tosfos was using that as a means, halachically, to justify the people he saw in Europe who weren't being machmer in Mayim Acharonim. Why were there people not being machmer in Mayim Acharonim, not keeping the halach of Mayim Acharonim? Because they felt, it's not so matzoi. But Tosfos, the Aruch HaShulchan wasn't saying that's the Metzias. No, he's giving a cheap answer to defend those people. But of course, Mayim Acharonim chova. Avogamra b'seinu Tosfos. I wish I put this on the sheets. Sorry, I only discovered this Friday night. Avogamra b'seinu Tosfos modim tzarek gam b'zman hazeh. And the Aruch HaShulchan writes, who could say they know for sure there's no Mayim Acharonim now? There's no Melech Sodomis now, excuse me. So the Aruch HaShulchan is saying strongly, no, there is a din of Melech Sodomis. There is a din of Melech Sodomis. Tosfos says we don't find it. Tosfos is just saying it to Binyasha people who weren't keeping the halacha. But of course, that should be the halacha. He says further. He says, and even when Tosfos writes that now we don't have Melech Sodomis, now he gets into being a sociologist. That's no, because in Europe and in Tosfos' time, they had salt which they mined from the mountains, which is a common way we have a lot of our salt today. Okay, in those places, that's what they had. But in our countries, Aruch HaShulchan grew up in Navardik, right? It's a Rav in Navardik. But in our countries, many people use sea salt all the time. Aruch HaShulchan says 100%, you got to be afraid of Melech Sodomis. Goes further, he quotes a Zohar and Parshas Pinchas, and the Kubalim are machmer in it. He brings a Sefer Tshuvos min HaShamayim from the Kadmonim, Shakol HaMekel b'Mayim Acharonim, anyone who's lenient and not so observant of Mayim Acharonim, Mekilom is nosim in Shemayim. It's not good for your parnasa. L'chein, look at the lashon of the Aruch HaShulchan. He writes, L'chein yishizah b'zeh ma'od. You should be very careful about Mayim Acharonim. The Kach Nogim Kol Yirei Hashem, and this is the path of all Yirei Hashem. It's not enough for you to keep it. You should even go to the extent you should convince your household to keep it. So the Aruch HaShulchan is taking a much stronger position than even the Chavetz Chaim. Right? The Chavetz Chaim brought the Bir Agra that's machmer about it. It sounded like he himself was, look, maybe there's no Melech Sodomis, but there's something like it. Chavetz Chaim definitely read Tosas Kipshuto, that Tosas is already saying Mayim Acharonim doesn't exist. Melech Sodomis doesn't exist. But the Aruch HaShulchan is saying that something that does exist, and even Tosas he thought, he'll dray Tosas to get out of it. And he says, Yesh li zar b'zeh ma'od. A person should be very careful after he eats any meal to wash Mayim Acharonim. See, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to first show that I don't understand so much because how can you get the flavor and the type of people did the flavor? How does that work?
Yeah. What someone's asking is, it does sound strange if there's a mitzvah to do. He's asking that, okay, if Tosas saw people weren't doing it, he's defending them, he should be chastising them. So you do find, mitzvah liyashva, that you do find poskim do try to defend how come sometimes people don't keep a practice. And they, if it could be malamit schus on some of the Klal Yisrael, maybe part of the mitzvah dalakav schus. So the poskim sometimes try to do that. But you're right, it's definitely a strange pshat in Tosas. It's not the Pasha pshat in Tosas. Pasha pshat in Tosas is saying, be so worried about Mayim Acharonim. Because there's no Melech Sodomis. And even the Chavetz Chaim took that for granted. It's the Aruch HaShulchan who's taking a very strong stance and telling you, 100% to keep Mayim Acharonim, you have to be worried about Melech Sodomis. Tosfos is just saying that to be miyashiv, the group of people in Europe who weren't doing it. Yeah, not simple. But that's what he says. Now, practically, just to give out a few points, and we see how different poskim treat it. Women. Do women wash Mayim Acharonim? Right? You've been around a table. Let's say, obviously, a house that's keeping Mayim Acharonim. They pass around the nice Mayim Acharonim. Do women wash? Many, many places you will not find women that wash. For the record, I did track down Rabbi Yashav as well as Rav Shlomo Zalman. They both said that women should wash. Very simple reasoning. You know why? So if the whole reason of Mayim Acharonim is because of Melech Sodomis, because of Sakana, what difference is in men and women? The same way there's a Sakana for men, should be a Sakana for women. So what do you say, Tzvi? So the poskim actually say that. I didn't want to get messy, but the poskim do say that men are more prone to eat with their fingers in a more messier way than women. And thus, the idea of getting salt in your hands is more of a guy problem than a woman problem. Our poskim, the mama say that svara. Your mother will thank you for that. But there is such an idea. However, I found that there are many poskim that say that nowadays we could be mako by women because anyway, whole Mayim Acharonim is a chumrah because Tosfos says, not going like the Aruch HaShulchan, Tosfos says, it's not really matzah in Melech Sodomis. It's not really found. So the whole thing anyway is a chumrah. So the chumrah, men are makbid on, women are not. That's one thing I saw. Another thing, I can't not think about it. I remember one time I accompanied a high school class I was a Beis Medrash Bacher. They went to the Lower East Side. They had the schus of visiting Rabbi Feinstein. But after that, the Rebbe came up with Chab. He has class in the Lower East Side. He wanted to show them what the good old Lower East Side. He took them to Gus's Pickles. Gus's Pickle is one of the legendary pickle stores all the way from way back when Zadie was young. And they literally have those barrels filled with pickles. And the cross from a pickle. And someone who eats a pickle, nice and salty, would you have to wash your hands after because of Melech Sodomis? Why is it only limited to a bread meal? If you eat something which is salty, let's say the good old Lower East Side, that's what they use, the old salt. So would one have to wash their hands after eating a pickle or something else salty? So I saw both Rav Yashiv and Yibad Chaim Kanievsky both say the one could be Mekel. Again, using the logic, in general, Mayim Acharonim is a Chumrah. Seems like people are more in the Chavetz Chaim's camp than the Aruch HaShulchan's camp. That's viewed a little bit more as a Chumrah. And thus, one will only know that by bread, but by salty pickles or anything else, no, you wouldn't have to. And finally, one other area is how big of a kli do you need for Mayim Acharonim? Sometimes you see these Mayim Acharonim sets, the receptacle that they put the water in, is mamish like the size of your thumb. And that's because many people say you don't need much water for Mayim Acharonim. Just touch tips of your fingers. However, I don't know if you've ever been to a house, but there are some people that have a huge cup for Mayim Acharonim. I've seen this in quite a few houses. You have a nice big washing cup. Or you sometimes find some people do it very delicately. They pass around the Mayim Acharonim, which is a small cup, and they delicately, let's say go to, sneak out to the sink and wash by the sink. The reasoning for that is the Gra holds, remember the Gra is someone who's very machmer in Mayim Acharonim. He holds you should wash your full hand, full revius. So thus, that's why some people have a big cup, and that's why some people dafka wash by the sink where there is a big cup. They wouldn't just use a small Mayim Acharonim set. But again, the general minhag olam is to be mekel and use a smaller one. Again, for the same reason, because most of the world does view Mayim Acharonim more of a chumrah than an absolute chiyuv nowadays. In fact, I even saw a line from the Chazon Ish that the Chazon Ish supposedly said, they asked, but it says Ma'aser Rav that the Gra used revius. So the Chazon Ish cast doubt on whether that was true. It's brought to say from Ma'aser Rav. He says, who was there to watch him? That's what it says. So what concludes, I believe, from today's share is a fascinating insight to why we do Mayim Acharonim, the connection between Mayim Acharonim and this past week's parsha, the destruction of Sodom, the fear of this Melech Sodomis, and the machlokas through the ages. Do we still have Melech Sodomis? Yes, no. Chavetz Chaim says maybe we have semi-Sodom salt. And the different paths the different posts can take, the Gra being machmer, the Aruch HaShulchan strongly being machmer, while the Chavetz Chaim and many modern day poskim more nuanced. A person should do Mayim Acharonim Chovetz, halachas, but within the halachas, there's room to be mekel, whether for women, for the size of the cup, after you have a pickle, all these different things. Thank you very, very much for listening. I hope, as Hashem, next week, to be able to give a share this time with Zecher Nishmas, of David Feinstein, a full halachic appreciation of one of the Poskei Hador, and it's again, to me, it's the biggest change that happened in the world from last week to this week. The loss of an Adam Gadol, a posek like that, is something which should shock us all, should scare us all. And anyone who's able to participate, it's available all over Jewish websites. The live stream for David Feinstein's Levaya, which is happening now. Wonderful week. Go to.